Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring what is essentially a literal cosmic call to arms. We're looking at chapter 2 of a really unique spiritual text called The Spirit Message of Yaidron. Now, whether you're already deeply familiar with modern new religious movements, or you're just kind of curious about how spiritual organizations build up their theology of defense, this text offers a completely captivating look at what happens when a spiritual leader hands down some incredibly urgent esoteric directives to their followers. We'll be neutrally mapping out all the concepts presented in these pages, really digging into exactly what is being asked of the believers here. So, our source material today is a volume of messages supposedly channeled from higher spiritual beings, and our focus is strictly on Chapter 2, which was actually recorded back on December 7th, 2019. Within these pages, we find some profound and honestly surprisingly urgent critiques about organizational theology, the current state of the followers, and the absolute non-negotiable need for aggressive spiritual defense. To navigate all this complex theology, we're going to follow a pretty clear progression. First, Yaidron as the guardian of the Lord. Second, the vulnerability of believers. Third, the right defensive attitude. Fourth, overcoming core spiritual illusions. And finally, number 5, achieving sharpness and mobility. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Yaidron, Guardian of the Lord. For a little context, the doctrine in our source outlines Yaidron not just as your, typical angel or guide. No, he's presented as a fiercely uncompromising cosmic protector operating from this vast extraterrestrial perspective. According to the text, his entire existence and mission revolves around acting as the ultimate vanguard and shield for the supreme deity of this movement, El Cantare. So, this cosmic framing, it's really meant to elevate the stakes of his message from just simple moral advice to a literal universal imperative. Looking at the original transcripts, they reveal that Yaidron is continually intercepting evil entities and fending off these spiritual attacks aimed at the organization's leader, who, by the way, is seen as the earthly incarnation of that supreme deity. So Yaidron's role is basically a constant, heavy-duty shield against unseen negative forces. He is right there in the trenches of unseen spiritual warfare. And, as we're about to see, he entirely expects the human followers to join him down there. Which brings us to Section 2, the vulnerability of believers. So, Yaidron perceives a really critical weakness in the current state of the believers. When addressing the religious organization known as Happy Science, he states plainly, he doesn't sugarcoat it, that the group has not yet become an organization that actually protects the Lord. He sees a stark vulnerability here and addresses it with startling directness. This quote right here really captures the core of his frustration. He severely critiques the members for prioritizing this gentle, almost naive kind of love. And sure, while love is generally a huge virtue in religion, Yaidron argues that right here, right now, it's actually become a liability. He states they are completely lacking in what he terms sacred anger. That's a fierce, totally necessary, and righteous defense against hostile forces trying to undermine their faith and their leader. He goes on to amplify this critique, stating the organization is just entirely too optimistic. The source text literally describes them as being extremely complacent and living in a defenseless situation. By focusing only on self-preservation and internal peace, Yaidron claims they're basically leaving the front door wide open to both spiritual interference from evil spirits and real-world opposition from global forces.
What Yaidron is demanding here is a massive paradigm shift. He wants followers to break out of this passive, weak state of mere self-preservation and transition into a highly active, bold defense. They're being called to adopt a militant spiritual posture, where protecting their doctrine and their leader is absolutely paramount. It's a complete 180.
Let's move right along to Section 3, the right defensive attitude. In a Q&A section of the text that addresses the proper attitude of a believer, Yaidron describes his own methods. He says he strikes evil forces from the heavens with a flash of lightning. To combat all that extreme complacency we just talked about, Yaidron asserts that believers have to unite their doctrinal knowledge with decisive, courageous action. They need to mirror his intense, forceful methods in their own earthly endeavors if they want to build any real-world influence against opposing forces. Further explaining the source of his strength, Yaidron uses a really grounded metaphor that I find super interesting. He compares his relentless spiritual protection to an ER doctor, an emergency medical physician grabbing tiny, brief naps while constantly being targeted and remaining on super high alert.
His uncompromising strength stems from this cosmic perspective on extraterrestrial missions, essentially treating spiritual threats as urgent, life-or-death emergencies. And he expects the movement's leaders to adopt that exact same level of hypervigilant urgency.
This naturally leads us into Section 4, Overcoming Core Spiritual Illusions. In another Q&A segment, Yaidron explains that believers are currently trapped by internal barriers. The doctrine actually refers to this as needing to break through the walls of this world. Basically, Yaidron insists that before they can even think about effectively defending the organization, the disciples must undergo a really strict and unyielding internal spiritual reform. And he issues some highly specific directives here. He says true leadership and defense are totally impossible as long as followers harbor fundamental doubts, which, by the way, the text identifies as one of the major earthly desires. They also have to eradicate false views that cloud their judgment. Essentially, they have to completely overcome their basic human instinct for self-preservation if they want to truly grasp and boldly convey the true intentions or the true heart of their supreme deity. Finally, let's look at Section 5, Achieving Sharpness and Mobility. Here, Yaidron explicitly calls for those in charge to stop resting on their laurels. He points out that way too many people are just coasting in their respective positions. He demands they take on a significantly higher level of responsibility to actually solve real-world problems. This isn't just a minor tweak, it is a demand for a total operational overhaul from top to bottom. By following these precise steps outlined in the doctrine, Yaidron claims the entire movement can transform. The ultimate goal? To evolve from a passive group into a spiritually tough, highly agile, and razor-sharp force. The text frames its evolution as absolutely necessary, not just for the survival of the group itself, but to make them capable of responding to unseen spiritual warfare, as well as the escalating global crises happening right here in the physical world. So as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at the broader implications of these fascinating source materials. We have to ask ourselves, if a religious movement successfully adopts this militant theological posture, trading gentle passivity for sacred anger and extreme vigilance, how does that translate into physical action? How might a doctrine demanding sharp, mobile, and uncompromising defense completely reshape an organization's real-world influence, especially when they view global crises as actual spiritual battlegrounds? It is a really profound question about the intersection of internal theology and external action, and I'll leave you to ponder it. Thanks so much for joining me in breaking down this material today.